So we've had the what, the why, the how. Now we come to the group that I like to refer to as the screw it, we'll do it live. Where this discussion started, there were some folks saying, oh gosh, I don't know, SBOM, I don't know if we want to go down this road. And we had some folks say, no, we want this, we need to do this. Not just because our regulator is pushing us in this direction, but because there's a lot of work to be done in their particular space. And so I want to acknowledge how important the work that the healthcare proof of concept did. First, in just helping to sell this general issue. There's a very senior person in security who was quite skeptical of SBOM for a long time, but on hearing that there was not just going to be meetings, but people actually building stuff, he was like, that's amazing. A proof of concept is worth 100 multi-stakeholder meetings, maybe 1,000. So love to hear from Jim and Mike about both what you've done and what you've learned along the way, and then maybe tease up what you've got coming up.
Sure, thank you. So yeah, my name is Mike Dittamo. I am from New York Presbyterian, and you're going to talk about a bit about the healthcare proof of concept, the 1.0, and then also looking forward really to what we're doing as part of the 2.0. So just to restate the objective of the 1.0, we were looking to have a collaborative effort between both the healthcare delivery organizations as well as the medical device manufacturers to develop an SBOM using both of the formats you've heard about, SPDX and SWID, and then exercise some use cases around the production of that SBOM as well as the consumption and usage throughout various stages of security analysis and asset management within the HDO space. So we have published the report, as Alan said, ntia.gov/SBOM. It goes into fairly good detail about exactly the approach we took, some of the things that were in scope versus out of scope, and some of the things we were able to do and some of the things we had some challenges with and lessons learned as to what we would be looking to correct or address in the future. But the results, ultimately, we did have some demonstrable evidence and data in the report, as well as part of these readout meetings, that we were able to do this. We were able to establish it as an effective tool to transfer the data, to consume the data, parse the data out, and ultimately use it to identify vulnerable components throughout the makeup of the software. Some challenges, and I'll go into these in a bit more detail in just a bit. Some of them, no surprise, you've heard of them already. First one, naming conventions. So the absence of an authoritative naming standard did prove to be difficult. Some partial version information, and when I say partial, it's not really full. You can say software 10, but maybe there's a 10.6.407.3. We didn't always get that amount of detail. So it was difficult to establish exactly what version the component was. Vulnerability versus exploitation. So we all know those are two different things. What is vulnerable versus what is exploitable? There was no way to really determine between those two things. Configuration vulnerabilities, not necessarily with the software component itself, but how it is configured. There's no authoritative end-of-life database, which is something we had to do manually. And lastly, there was a lack of patch-level data included in the SBOM. So just to go through quickly the use cases that we explored, the first being actual development of the SBOM itself. And then once we were able to consume it on the HDO side, it was procurement, the procurement use case, which would be looking for, upon procurement of the system, vulnerable end-of-life components, system conflicts, and even customized software, with the hope of having a reduction in questionnaires and reliance on white papers and MDS2s and things like that to be able to make a holistic determination of that particular software. Second was risk management. really to do an initial but also ongoing risk assessment of the system and supporting components. Also to look at to see what's acceptable from a risk tolerance perspective, and in some cases identify compensating controls that the organizations could do to live with the risk, right? To I don't want to say accept, but to reduce the risk, to have the residual risk to an acceptable amount, and to live with that. The third, vulnerability management. So the one thing we wanted to do was to be able to query this data on an ongoing basis to identify vulnerabilities as they emerge or as vulnerabilities are announced by the particular manufacturers or by other authoritative entities. Batch asset querying, really kind of to ping the fleet, to go across everything at once, as opposed to say, well, we have this here, we have this here, I don't know what's in this, I don't know what's in that. Not ideal, obviously. We want to just be able to kind of press a button and say, here's where everything we have this in, or here's everything that has this across our entire fleet. And then lastly, to do a quantitative analysis, so to actually look at CVSS scores, and to be able to actually quantify and prioritize across a number of vulnerabilities. And the last is asset management, just in general, to be able to play into the overall lifecycle management story of the devices, supporting components, software, and then just to have a full asset inventory. I think that's an important concept in general. We have an asset inventory of physical devices, computers, applications, but not really that secondary and third layer. So 2.0, and this is, I'll have to give credit to my CISO for this term. It's certainly a healthcare term, but actually the first time I heard of it, we want to bring the proof of concept from bench to bedside. So really kind of everything we've done now in the POC 1.0 was on the bench side. It was still very done in a laboratory, quote-unquote, setting. We didn't really bring it live, so to say, even though we did exercise a lot of live use cases. What we want to do is really take that, identify some of the gaps, focus on those gaps that prevented that live production level analysis, and really kind of address those as part of the 2.0. So what does this mean? So, the first thing we want to do is develop an organizational reference model. So look at across all of the participants in this POC 1.0, processes, activities, tasks, other business operations that are critical for the adoption, performance, and management of the software bill of materials, both upon ingestion or development and ingestion, as well as on an ongoing basis. We want to explore both industry agnostic and industry specific applications of this and see where those differences are. And then really just define an ecosystem and taxonomy of the technology and processes that we're all using, see what is really needed to get this done, not down to the specific level, the specific make and model level, but just kind of what technologies are actually being used to do this. That's on the MDM side, generation, distribution, I know it was mentioned earlier as well. We did this manually in the current state, so we just threw it up on a file share and said, you go get it. Not a sustainable practice. We want to actually come up with a distribution model and exercise that. And then also maintenance. So we had about a 30-day period where the SBOMs were created, passed off, and that was kind of it. What would maintenance look like in the future as well as systems change, undergo upgrades, components are swapped out? On the HDO side, consumption, same thing, was done fairly manual, copy paste, and then pull it in. Asset and vulnerability management, we for the most part did end up using some of the same tactics and technologies to really get the data parsed, analyzed, found the National Vulnerability Database, I think was really the only authoritative database we used. We all kind of landed upon the same idea to correlate those two things. The one thing we didn't really get able to do was ongoing monitoring, once again due to a fairly short timeline. But it was certainly practical. We also identified some initial areas for collaboration across the broader group and potentially even with third parties and vendors. So, this sounds like a broken record. The lack of standard naming conventions, we really didn't come up with a good solution on how to address this outside of just say, well, we're going to have to do a gap analysis of which ones didn't match up and then just figure out what they actually are. Tooling improvements around the generation, something with internet-based delivery or some type of callable way, and then the consumption. Identification of second, third, fourth, however low we want to go, components within the SBOM. I think it's there's two ways I like to look at it. The component of components, and somebody mentioned how many hops. I like that as well. We did really just kind of the top as part of this POC, but it would make a lot of sense certainly to explore how to generate and analyze the components of components, patch level, full versioning, get that detail in here so we could have a much more granular view as to the components. And then proving out a method to describe the context of components. And this is one that Jim brought up, and I think it's a great point. Allowing the HDOs themselves to actually distinguish between exploitability and vulnerability, and what does it look like to be able to actually do that. So lastly, and then I'll kind of open it up for discussion. So next steps, really to solidify and come to a consensus on the 2.0 objectives in scope and out of scope based on everything I previously discussed. Look for other industry verticals who are doing similar POCs or have similar thoughts as to how these could be done, set up maybe periodic information sharing or collaborative sessions, seeking additional participants from the HDO and MDM community, as well as some third-party supplier communities. I think I briefly mentioned it last time. I certainly have at one point that we do have non-HDO, non-MDM third-party organizations who are interested in participating in this. Things like CMDB vendors, security incident and event management systems, to really kind of bring a fresh take to what we're doing, get a new set of eyes on it, and really leverage their expertise as to how we can maybe solve some of these problems using their tools and technologies. And then lastly, we have decided to work towards a date, because I know that's one of the most important things, set a deadline, and then you can kind of work towards that. So we're looking to kick off the execution of the 2.0 on February 5th. So we're really looking to get a lot of this stuff done between now and then, and have more information for the remote NTIA meeting, January, February or so. With that, I think about a few minutes left. Wanted to open that up for questions, comments. Oh, looks like maybe we're getting some more audio-visual stuff too.
Slowly, things are coming back to us. So thank you, Mike. Thank you, Jim. Thank you to that group. That was a lot of work and actually happened fairly quickly once the lawyers got out of the way. So the NDA was
that is true.
And that allowed you guys to do what you need to do. So you shouldn't badmouth them too much. The other thing I want to flag is that the work you've done has sort of helped other people realize that they weren't going to commit full on to the practice, they could experiment it in this sort of pilot-like or exercise-like approach. And there are a number of organizations and sectors that are beginning to walk in that direction. The goal here is to allow people to feel comfortable doing it. So we want to make sure that folks can adapt it to what their needs are. But the bigger goal, it's going to pivot to where we're going to do next, is to make sure that we can document the lessons learned, that the folks doing it can get input from the community, and then the lessons learned can be shared out with the rest of the community.